Hi, I'm Natalie. 3 days ago, I nearly died alone in a freezing car on Christmas Eve. My own father and stepmother left me there after discovering something that would change everything between us forever. But my 80-year-old grandfather drove through a blizzard at midnight to find me, and what he told me in that hospital room would turn my entire world upside down. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The wind howled against the windows of our Portland home like it was trying to claw its way inside. December 24th had arrived with the kind of bitter cold that makes your bones ache just thinking about stepping outside. I should have been excited. Christmas Eve had always been magical in our family, or at least it used to be, before Veronica moved in 3 years ago, with her perfect children and her need to control every single detail of our lives. I sat at the kitchen island, scrolling through my laptop while the smell of Veronica's famous cinnamon rolls filled the air. She'd been up since 5 in the morning, orchestrating what she called the perfect Brooks family Christmas. Everything had to be flawless for her annual Christmas Eve party. The house sparkled like a magazine spread, every surface dusted and polished, every ornament positioned with military precision on our 9-foot Fraser fir. My father Marcus bustled around her like a satellite, fetching whatever she needed, adjusting decorations she'd already adjusted twice, and nodding enthusiastically at every suggestion she made. It was painful to watch, honestly. The man who used to build blanket forts with me on snow days now jumped whenever Veronica cleared her throat or pointed at something that needed moving. Dylan and Chloe, Veronica's kids from her first marriage, had claimed the living room as their personal staging area. Dylan was setting up his new gaming equipment that had arrived early courtesy of overnight shipping, while Chloe practiced poses in front of the massive mirror Veronica had installed above the fireplace. Both of them moved through the house like they owned it, which I suppose they did now in every way that mattered. I'd been living in this strange limbo for months, ever since graduating from Portland State with my education degree. The job market was brutal, and every teaching position I'd applied for had been filled by someone with more experience or better connections. Veronica had made it clear that my extended stay was a temporary inconvenience, though she said it with her signature smile that never quite reached her eyes. The original plan had been simple: move back home for a few months, save money while substitute teaching, and then find my own place by spring. But substitute teaching barely covered my student loan payments, let alone rent in Portland's inflated housing market. Every conversation about my future felt like a countdown timer ticking in the background of family dinners. My laptop chimed with a new email notification. I clicked it open, hoping it might be a response to one of the dozens of job applications I'd sent out before the holiday break. Instead, it was from GradWrite Solutions, an online tutoring platform I'd signed up for weeks ago but hadn't heard back from. The subject line made my pulse quicken: "Congratulations, welcome to the GradWrite team." I read through the email twice, hardly believing what I was seeing. They were offering me a position as a college prep specialist, working entirely online with students across the Pacific Northwest. The pay was better than substitute teaching, and I could work from anywhere with a reliable internet connection. Even better, they wanted me to start right after New Year's, pending the completion of my background check and training modules. For the first time in months, I felt something that resembled hope. This could be my ticket out of this house, my chance to finally stand on my own feet, without Veronica's passive-aggressive comments about the dishes I left in the sink, or the way I apparently loaded the dishwasher incorrectly. I was so absorbed in reading through the contract details that I almost didn't notice when the conversation in the kitchen shifted. Veronica's voice had taken on that particular tone she used when she was building up to something important, the one that made everyone stop what they were doing and pay attention. "Marcus, honey, we need to discuss something with Natalie before the guests arrive tonight," she was saying, her voice carrying that false sweetness that always made my stomach clench. I looked up from my laptop to find both of them staring at me. My father's expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that looked almost apologetic. Veronica, on the other hand, looked like a cat who'd finally cornered a mouse. "What's going on?" I asked, closing my laptop and giving them my full attention. Veronica exchanged a meaningful glance with my father before smoothing down her apron and taking a deep breath. "Well, we've been doing some thinking about the new year, and we've made some decisions about the house." The hope I'd been feeling just moments before began to curdle in my chest. Something about the way she said decisions made it clear that I hadn't been included in whatever process had led to this conversation. "We've decided to convert the guest room into a home office for my design business," Veronica continued, her tone matter of fact. "The business has been growing so much, and I really need a dedicated workspace. Plus, Dylan's gonna need his own space when he transfers to Portland Community College next fall." I felt like the floor had shifted beneath me. The guest room was my room. I'd been staying there since graduation, and while it had never been officially mine, it was the only space in this house that felt even remotely like home anymore. "Where exactly am I supposed to sleep?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. My father finally spoke up, though he couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Nat, you're 22 now. We think it's time for you to find your own place. We've given you plenty of time to get back on your feet, and we know you're capable of taking care of yourself." The words hit me like physical blows. Plenty of time? It had been 6 months since graduation, 6 months of struggling to find decent work in an impossible job market, 6 months of being made to feel like a burden in my own father's house. "Dad, I just got offered a job," I said, pulling my laptop back open and turning the screen toward them. "Look, it's with GradRight Solutions. I can start working right after New Year's, and the pay is actually decent. I just need a little more time to save up for a deposit and first month's rent." Veronica barely glanced at the screen before shaking her head. "That's wonderful, honey, but we've already made our plans. The contractors are coming on January 2nd to start the renovation." "January 2nd? I stared at her in disbelief. "That's next week. You're giving me a week's notice to find a place and move out?" "We thought you'd appreciate having the holidays to figure things out," my father said, though his voice lacked conviction. "And you've known this arrangement was temporary." I looked back and forth between them, waiting for one of them to crack a smile or admit this was some kind of terrible joke. But Veronica's expression remained pleasantly neutral, and my father was studying his shoes like they held the secrets of the universe. "This is because of what happened at Thanksgiving, isn't it?" I asked quietly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Thanksgiving had been a disaster, though not entirely of my making. Veronica's sister had come to visit with her family, and during dinner, she'd made some comment about how nice it must be for me to have such a comfortable place to land while I figured out my life. The way she said it made it clear she thought I was taking advantage of my father's generosity. I'd responded, perhaps too sharply, that I was actively looking for work and paying what I could toward groceries and utilities. The conversation had escalated from there, with Veronica's sister suggesting that maybe I needed some tough love to motivate me to become truly independent. I'd stood up from the table and walked away rather than say something I'd regret, but the damage had been done. "This has nothing to do with Thanksgiving," Veronica said, but her tone had sharpened slightly. "This is about what's best for our family moving forward." Our family. Not my family, not the Brooks family, but their family. The distinction was subtle but unmistakable. I closed my laptop again and stood up from the kitchen island. "Right. Of course. Well, I guess I better start looking for apartments then." "Natalie, don't be dramatic," my father said, but I was already walking toward the stairs. "I'm not being dramatic, Dad. I'm being practical. You want me out by January 2nd, so I need to start making calls." I climbed the stairs 2 at a time, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and panic. A week to find an apartment in Portland during the holidays? Even with the new job, I'd barely have enough saved for a security deposit, let alone first and last month's rent that most landlords required. In my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to think through my options. I could probably find a room to rent somewhere, maybe with other recent graduates who were also struggling to make ends meet. It wouldn't be ideal, but it would be temporary until I could save enough for my own place. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through rental listings, but the numbers made my stomach sink. Even the smallest studio apartments were asking for more than I could afford, and most of them required proof of income that was 3 times the monthly rent. With my inconsistent substitute teaching pay, I'd never qualify. The sound of voices and laughter drifted up from downstairs as the first Christmas Eve party guests began to arrive. I could hear Veronica's bright, welcoming tone as she ushered people inside, probably telling them about her wonderful new office space and how excited she was for the new year. I spent the next hour on my phone, calling every rental listing that seemed even remotely within my budget. Most went straight to voicemail, and the few landlords who answered told me they weren't showing properties until after the new year. One particularly honest property manager laughed when I asked about moving in within a week. "Honey, this time of year, you'd have better luck finding a unicorn," she said, not unkindly. "Everyone's either traveling for the holidays or not dealing with business until January. Your best bet is to extend your current situation if you can." But extending my current situation wasn't an option. Veronica had made that crystal clear. As evening fell and the party downstairs grew louder, I found myself staring out my bedroom window at the snow that had started to fall. The flakes caught the light from the street lamps, creating a winter wonderland that should have been beautiful but instead felt ominous. Weather reports had been warning about a significant storm system moving in, with temperatures expected to drop well below freezing overnight. I tried calling a few friends from college, hoping someone might have a couch I could crash on for a few weeks, but most of them had moved back to their hometowns, or were dealing with their own post-graduation struggles. The few who were still in Portland were either living with family themselves.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Or in tiny apartments with roommates who wouldn't appreciate a long-term house guest. Around 9 o'clock, there was a soft knock on my bedroom door. I looked up, expecting to see my father, maybe ready to have a real conversation about finding a solution that worked for everyone. Instead, Chloe poked her head around the doorframe. "Hey," she said quietly, glancing back down the hallway before stepping into the room and closing the door behind her. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Chloe and I had a complicated relationship. She was 16, caught between being Veronica's daughter and genuinely seeming to like me as a person. Sometimes I felt like she was the only one in the house who saw me as more than just an inconvenience to be managed. "What's up?" I asked, making room for her to sit on the edge of the bed. She was quiet for a moment, picking at the hem of her Christmas Eve dress. "I heard Mom talking to Mrs. Patterson earlier," she finally said, "about you moving out." Mrs. Patterson was Veronica's business partner and closest friend, a woman who never missed an opportunity to share her opinions about other people's life choices. "What did she say?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "She said it was about time someone gave you a reality check, that you'd been coasting on your dad's guilt about the divorce for too long." Chloe looked up at me with troubled eyes. "But that's not true, is it? I mean, you're always working or looking for work. You help with groceries and stuff. The divorce, my parents had split when I was 15, a messy affair that had left my father consumed with guilt about disrupting my teenage years. When he met Veronica 2 years later, she'd seemed understanding about his relationship with me, even encouraging in the beginning. But that understanding had gradually eroded as she established her own family unit within our home. "It's complicated, Chloe," I said, not wanting to put her in the middle of adult problems. "Mom also said something about how you'd been snooping around in places you shouldn't be," Chloe continued, her voice even quieter now. "Something about finding papers that weren't your business." My blood went cold. Papers that weren't my business? What papers could she be talking about? "Did she say what kind of papers?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Chloe shook her head. "No, but she seemed really upset about it. Like, more upset than I've seen her about anything in a long time." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold air seeping through my bedroom window. What papers could Veronica be referring to? I'd been careful not to go through their personal belongings, but maybe I'd accidentally seen something I shouldn't have. Then it hit me. Last week, I'd been helping my father organize some old files in his home office. Stuff related to taxes and insurance that needed to be sorted before the end of the year. Veronica had been out at a client meeting, and Dad had asked me to help him make sense of the paperwork chaos that had accumulated over the months. Most of it had been routine stuff: utility bills, credit card statements, insurance documents. But there had been one folder that seemed out of place, filled with legal documents I didn't immediately recognize. I'd only glanced at them briefly before my father had taken the folder and set it aside, saying it was something he needed to handle personally. Could that be what Veronica was talking about? Had there been something in those documents that she didn't want me to see? Chloe, do you know where your mom keeps important papers? Like legal stuff? I asked carefully. She looked uncomfortable. Why do you want to know? I'm just trying to understand what she might be upset about. I don't want there to be any misunderstandings, especially not at Christmas. Chloe was quiet for a long moment, clearly torn between loyalty to her mother and whatever instinct was telling her that something wasn't right about this situation. She has a file cabinet in their bedroom, she finally said. But Nat, you can't go through her stuff. That would just make everything worse. I nodded, understanding her concern. But the seed of suspicion had been planted, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to my sudden eviction than just Veronica's need for office space. After Chloe left to rejoin the party, I sat alone in my room, listening to the sounds of celebration drifting up from below. Christmas carols played softly on the sound system, occasionally punctuated by bursts of laughter or the clinking of glasses. It should have been comforting, the sound of family and friends coming together to celebrate the holidays. Instead, it felt like I was listening to a party I wasn't invited to, even though I was technically still part of the household. The snow continued to fall outside my window, and I could see that it was starting to accumulate on the sidewalks and street. The weather reports had been right about the storm intensifying. By morning, Portland would be buried under several inches of snow, with more expected throughout Christmas Day. I tried to focus on practical matters, making lists of what I needed to pack, and researching extended stay hotels that might have availability. But my mind kept returning to what Chloe had said about papers and snooping. What could I have possibly seen that would make Veronica so upset? The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that there was something in that file folder my father had set aside. Something that Veronica didn't want me to know about. And if it was important enough to accelerate my eviction from the house, it was probably something I needed to understand. I waited until the party sounds died down, until I could hear people saying their goodbyes and car doors slamming in the driveway. My father and Veronica would be busy cleaning up and getting ready for bed, distracted by the aftermath of hosting. Moving as quietly as possible, I slipped out of my room and down the hallway toward my father's office. The door was closed, but not locked. Inside, the room was dark, except for the glow of streetlights filtering through the blinds. I used my phone's flashlight to navigate to the filing cabinet where we'd been working the week before. The folder I remembered was still there, tucked between insurance policies and tax returns. I pulled it out carefully and opened it on my father's desk, using my phone to illuminate the pages. What I found inside made my hands shake and my knees go weak. Legal documents, adoption papers, and a name I'd never seen before in connection with my family, Walter Brooks. My grandfather, my father's father, who I'd been told had died when I was a baby. According to the documents in front of me, Walter Brooks was very much alive. Not only alive, but the legal owner of the house I'd grown up in, the house my father and Veronica were currently living in. The property deed showed that ownership had been transferred to my grandfather years ago as part of some kind of estate planning arrangement. But that wasn't the most shocking part. Clipped to the back of the property documents was a handwritten letter, dated just 3 months ago, addressed to my father. The letterhead read Brooks & Associates Legal Services, and the signature at the bottom belonged to someone named Patricia Henderson. I read the letter 3 times before the full meaning sank in. My grandfather, the grandfather I'd never known was alive, had been trying to contact me. Not just recently, but for years. And according to this lawyer, there was a trust fund that had been set up in my name when I was born, a trust fund that I was supposed to have access to on my 22nd birthday. My 22nd birthday had been 4 months ago. The letter went on to explain that Walter Brooks had been sending letters and gifts to this address for years, all of which had apparently been intercepted and never delivered to me. The lawyer was writing to inform my father that Mr. Brooks was considering legal action to establish contact with his granddaughter, as was his right under Oregon family law. The final paragraph made my vision blur with tears of rage. The trust fund wasn't just some small inheritance. It was substantial enough to cover college expenses, living costs, and a down payment on a home. Money that could have changed my entire post-graduation experience, Money that could have given me the independence and security I'd been desperately seeking. Money that my father and Veronica had apparently been hiding from me for months. I took pictures of every document with my phone, my hands shaking so badly I had to retake several shots to make sure they were clear. Then I carefully put everything back exactly as I'd found it, and crept back to my room. I sat on my bed in the darkness, scrolling through the photos on my phone, reading and rereading the lawyer's letter. My grandfather was alive. He'd been trying to reach me for years. There was money, enough money to completely change my situation, and my own father had been keeping it from me. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made me quickly turn off my phone and pretend to be asleep. I heard my father and Veronica's voices as they passed my door, talking quietly about what a successful party it had been, and how they were looking forward to starting fresh in the new year. Starting fresh. The phrase took on an entirely different meaning now that I knew what they'd been hiding from me. They weren't just kicking me out to make room for Veronica's business expansion. They were trying to get rid of me before I discovered the truth about my grandfather and the money that was rightfully mine. I waited until I was sure they were asleep before turning my phone back on and staring at the photos I'd taken. The lawyer's contact information was clearly visible at the top of the letterhead, Patricia Henderson, with an address in Bend, Oregon. Bend was about 3 hours southeast of Portland, a small city in the high desert that I'd visited once on a college camping trip. If the lawyer was based there, it was possible that my grandfather lived there too. I looked at the time on my phone. It was past midnight now, officially Christmas Day. But I couldn't wait until the morning to process what I'd learned. I needed to understand exactly what my father and Veronica had been hiding, and I needed to figure out how to contact my grandfather. The snow was still falling heavily outside, and the wind had picked up, rattling the windows with each gust. The storm that had been predicted was definitely intensifying, but that didn't matter now. Nothing mattered except getting to the truth and finding the family member who had apparently been trying to reach me for years. I started packing my things, moving quietly so I wouldn't wake anyone. I didn't take much, just clothes, my laptop, important documents, and the few sentimental items I couldn't bear to leave behind. Everything fit into 2 suitcases and my college backpack. By 2 in the morning, I was ready to leave. I'd found a 24-hour car rental place near the airport that had availability, and I'd booked the last compact car in their fleet. The plan was simple: drive to Bend, find this lawyer Patricia Henderson, and get answers about my grandfather and the trust fund. I left a note on my pillow, short and to the point. Found out about Grandpa Walter and the trust fund. Gone to get answers, don't bother calling. I didn't sign it with love or any of the usual family pleasantries. Those felt dishonest now. The house was completely quiet as I carried my bags downstairs and loaded them into my old Honda Civic. The car had been a graduation gift from my father, though I now wondered if even that had been motivated by guilt rather than love. The roads were terrible, covered in a thick layer of snow that my car's tires struggled to grip. But I drove carefully, following the few other vehicles brave enough to be out in the storm, and gradually made my way out of Portland and onto Highway 26 toward Bend. The drive that should have taken 3 hours stretched into 5, as I navigated increasingly treacherous conditions. The snow kept falling, and the wind kept pushing my small car around on the highway. More than once, I considered turning back, but the thought of facing my father and Veronica after what I'd discovered kept me moving forward. I was about an hour outside of Bend when my car finally gave up. The engine had been making concerning noises for the last 20 miles, and when I tried to accelerate up a particularly steep hill, it simply stopped responding. I managed to coast to the side of the road before the power died completely. I sat in the driver's seat, watching snow accumulate on my windshield, and realized how serious my situation had become. It was nearly 8 in the morning, but the sky was still dark gray with storm clouds. My phone showed 1 bar of signal, and when I tried to call for roadside assistance, the call wouldn't go through. The temperature outside was well below freezing, and it was dropping fast inside the car now that the heater had stopped working. I was wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, nowhere near enough clothing for the conditions outside. My winter coat was packed in one of the suitcases in the back seat, but the thought of opening the car door and letting in more cold air made me hesitate. I tried the engine again, turning the key hopefully, but nothing happened. Not even the dashboard lights came on now. My phone was down to 15% battery, and I hadn't thought to bring a car charger. This was bad. Really bad. I wrapped my arms around myself and tried to think through my options. I could try walking, but I had no idea how far it was to the next town or gas station. In these conditions, walking could be more dangerous than staying with the car. But staying with the car meant hoping that someone would find me before the cold became life-threatening. I had never felt so completely alone in my life. The wind howled around the car, rocking it slightly with each gust. Snow continued to pile up on the windows, gradually blocking my view of the outside world. My breath started to fog in the increasingly cold air, and I could feel the temperature dropping with each passing minute. I pulled out my phone and tried calling 911, but the call failed to connect. I tried texting, but those wouldn't send either. Whatever cell tower normally served this area was apparently affected by the storm. That's when the real panic set in. I was stranded in a blizzard, hours away from anyone who knew where I was, with a dying phone battery and no way to call for help. I'd left my father's house in anger without telling anyone my specific destination. Even if they realized I was missing, they'd have no idea where to look for me. I climbed into the back seat and dug through my suitcases until I found my winter coat. Putting it on helped a little, but I could still feel the cold seeping through the car's windows and doors. I found a wool scarf and wrapped it around my neck, then put on the warmest hat I could find. But even with the additional layers, I knew I was in serious trouble. The car was becoming an icebox, and I had no way to generate heat. I tried running in place in the limited space, doing jumping jacks to keep my blood moving, but the physical activity only reminded me how little I'd eaten in the last 24 hours. Hours passed, though it was hard to tell exactly how many. My phone died completely around what I thought was noon, leaving me with no way to track time or communicate with the outside world. The snow had covered the car completely now, creating an eerie, muffled silence that was broken only by the sound of my own breathing and the occasional crack of settling snow. I started to feel drowsy, which I remembered from health class was a dangerous sign in cold weather. I forced myself to stay awake, to keep moving, to keep talking to myself just to hear a human voice. I recited poems I'd memorized in college, sang songs from my childhood, told myself stories about what I would do when I finally met my grandfather. But as the afternoon wore on and the temperature continued to drop, it became harder to stay coherent. My thoughts started to drift, and I found myself thinking about warm places, sitting by the fireplace at my childhood home, drinking hot chocolate after building snowmen, summer days at the beach when the sun felt so good on my skin. I was thinking about warmth when I heard it, the sound of an engine, getting closer. At first, I thought it might be my imagination, my mind playing tricks as hypothermia started to set in. But the sound grew louder, more distinct, definitely real. Someone was coming. I tried to sit up straighter, to make noise, to signal for help, but I realized I could barely move. My limbs felt heavy and unresponsive, and when I tried to call out, my voice came out as barely a whisper. The engine sound stopped somewhere nearby, and I heard a car door slam. Then footsteps, crunching through the snow, getting closer to my car. A knock on the passenger side window made me jump, though the movement was sluggish and delayed. Through the snow-covered glass, I could barely make out the shape of a person. "Hello?" a voice called out, muffled by the snow and wind. "Is someone in there?" I tried to respond, but my voice wouldn't work properly. I managed to tap weakly on the window, hoping whoever was out there would understand that I was alive. The sound of scraping followed as someone cleared snow away from the passenger door. Then the door opened, letting in a blast of cold air along with the face of the person who had found me. It was an older man, probably in his 70s or 80s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a gray beard dusted with snow. He was wearing a heavy winter coat and a knit cap, and he looked at me with immediate concern. "Oh, sweetheart," he said, his voice gentle but urgent. "How long have you been out here?" I tried to answer, but my teeth were chattering too hard to form words. The man looked at my face more closely, studying my features with an intensity that seemed strange given the circumstances. "What's your name?" he asked, though something in his expression suggested he might already know. Natalie?" I managed to stutter through numb lips. The man's face went completely pale, and he gripped the doorframe with shaking hands. "Natalie? Brooks?" he whispered. I nodded weakly, wondering how this stranger could possibly know my name. The man's eyes filled with tears, and he reached into the car to take my hand in his. His touch was warm and reassuring, and something about his presence made me feel safer than I had in hours. "Oh, my dear girl," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "I'm your grandfather, Walter. I've been looking for you for so very long." The hospital room was warm, almost uncomfortably so, after spending hours in that frozen car. I pulled the heated blankets closer around my shoulders and watched my grandfather Walter as he paced between the window and my bedside chair. He moved with surprising energy for someone his age, though I could see the worry etched deep in the lines around his eyes. "They're saying you'll make a full recovery," he said for the third time in the past hour, as if repeating it would make him believe it. "No permanent damage from the cold exposure, thank God." I nodded, still processing everything that had happened. The rescue, the ambulance ride, the concerned faces of emergency room doctors, who kept asking me if I knew how lucky I was to be alive. But mostly I was trying to understand how my grandfather had found me on that remote stretch of highway in the middle of a blizzard. "Grandpa Walter," I said, testing out the words that felt both foreign and familiar on my tongue. "How did you know where to look for me?" Quote. He stopped pacing and turned to face me, his weathered hands clasped tightly in front of him. "I've been tracking that lawyer's letters to your father for months. Patricia Henderson kept me informed about her attempts to contact you through official channels. When she told me the last letter mentioned that you might try to reach out directly, I started driving the routes between Portland and Bend every few days, hoping I might catch you if you decided to make the trip." The weight of that statement settled over me slowly. He'd been driving back and forth for months, just hoping to intercept me on a highway. The dedication behind such a gesture made my chest tight with emotion I wasn't prepared for. "Every few days," I asked quietly. "Sometimes more often than that," he admitted, settling into the chair beside my bed, "especially after the holidays started approaching." I had a feeling that if you were going to make a move, it would be around Christmas. Family tensions always run higher during the holidays. He was right about that. The irony wasn't lost on me that Christmas Eve, which was supposed to be about family coming together, had been the catalyst for everything falling apart. "Tell me about the trust fund," I said, pulling out my phone to show him the photos I'd taken of the legal documents. "Is it real?" Walter's face hardened as he looked at the images on my screen. "It's very real. I set it up the day you were born, with specific instructions that you were to have access to it on your 22nd birthday. The fund has been growing for over 2 decades now. It should be enough to give you complete financial independence." "How much are we talking about?" I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. "Just over $400,000, as of the last quarterly statement." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. 400,000? "I was a successful contractor for 40 years, he explained. "I built custom homes for wealthy clients throughout Oregon and Washington. I never married after your grandmother passed, never had other children to provide for. Every dollar I didn't need for my own modest expenses went into that trust fund for you. $400,000. Enough to pay off my student loans, buy a house, start a business, travel the world. Enough to never have to depend on anyone else ever again. And my father had known about it for months without saying a word. Why didn't my dad ever tell me about you?" I asked, though I was starting to suspect the answer would only make me angrier. Walter's expression grew sad, and he was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Your father and I had a falling out when you were very young. It started as a disagreement about how he was handling his marriage to your mother, but it escalated into something much bigger. We both said things we probably shouldn't have, and neither of us was willing to apologize first." He paused, looking out the hospital room window at the snow that was still falling steadily outside. After your parents divorced, I tried to reconnect with Marcus, to be there for you during what I knew must be a difficult time. But he was angry about a lot of things back then, and I think he saw my attempts to help as criticism of his parenting choices. So he just cut you out completely? He told me that if I wanted to be part of your life, I needed to respect his boundaries and his decisions about what was best for you. When I disagreed with some of those decisions, particularly his choice to let Veronica discourage any relationship between us, he made it clear that I wasn't welcome. The picture was becoming clearer, and it wasn't pretty. My father had essentially chosen his new wife's comfort over his own daughter's right to know her grandfather. And then, when money entered the equation, that choice had become even more calculated. The lawyer's letter mentioned that you've been sending gifts and letters that never reached me, I said. Walter nodded grimly. Birthday cards, Christmas presents, letters updating you on my life and asking about yours. I sent them to your father's address, assuming he would pass them along. It wasn't until Patricia started investigating that we realized nothing was getting through to you. How long has this Patricia Henderson been involved? I hired her about 6 months ago, when I realized that traditional family channels weren't working. She specializes in family law, particularly cases involving grandparent rights and estate disputes. She's the one who discovered that the trust fund documents I'd sent to Marcus years ago had never been shared with you. I felt a surge of gratitude toward this lawyer I'd never met. Without her investigation, I might have gone years longer without learning the truth about my grandfather or the financial security that had been waiting for me. Is she the reason my dad and Veronica suddenly decided to kick me out? Most likely, Walter confirmed. Patricia's last letter to your father was quite direct about our intentions to establish contact with you, with or without his cooperation. She gave him 30 days to facilitate a meeting between us, or we would pursue legal channels to make contact ourselves. That 30-day deadline must have been approaching, which explained the rushed timeline for my eviction. They'd been trying to get me out of the house and presumably out of Oregon before I could learn the truth about my grandfather. They were never planning to tell me, were they? I asked, though it was more of a statement than a question. Walter's silence was answer enough. A nurse came in to check my vital signs and brought me a tray of hot soup and sandwiches. I realized I hadn't eaten anything substantial since the previous morning, and my body was craving fuel to recover from the ordeal. As I ate, Walter told me more about his life and the years we'd missed together. He lived in a comfortable house on the outskirts of Bend, surrounded by acres of pine trees and mountain views. He'd retired from contracting 10 years earlier, but still kept busy with woodworking projects and volunteer work with Habitat for Humanity. He had a workshop where he built custom furniture, and he mentioned that he'd made several pieces over the years that he'd hoped to someday give to me. I have photo albums, he said quietly, pictures of you from when you were little, before the falling out with your father. And I kept copies of all the letters I sent, even though I never heard back. I suppose I was creating a record of what I wanted to share with you, hoping that someday I'd have the chance. The thought of him saving letters and photos for over a decade, maintaining hope that we'd eventually reconnect, made my heart ache. How many birthdays had he celebrated alone, thinking about the granddaughter he couldn't reach? How many holidays had he spent wondering what I was doing, whether I was happy, whether I even knew he existed? What happens now? I asked. With the trust fund, I mean. Patricia is prepared to file the paperwork to release the funds to you immediately. The only thing that was holding up the process was establishing contact and confirming your identity. Now that we've found each other, she can move forward with the legal steps to give you full access to the money. It seemed almost too good to be true. 24 hours ago, I'd been facing homelessness and financial instability. Now I was looking at complete financial independence and a relationship with a grandfather who clearly cared about me more than my own father did. There's something else, Walter continued, reaching into his coat pocket and pulling out an envelope. This came to my address yesterday. It's from your father's mortgage company. I took the envelope and read the return address, confused about why my grandfather would be receiving mail about my father's mortgage. Then I opened it and read the contents, and everything suddenly made sense. It was a notice about missed payments, and the beginning of foreclosure proceedings. But the property address listed wasn't just my father's house. According to this document, it was also Walter's house, because he was the legal owner and had been making the mortgage payments for the past 3 years. "You own my father's house?" I asked, staring at the paperwork. "I bought it when he was going through the divorce," Walter explained. "He was struggling financially, facing the possibility of losing the home you'd grown up in. I purchased it from the bank and allowed him to live there, with the understanding that he would make monthly payments to me instead of to a mortgage company." "And he stopped making payments?" Walter nodded sadly. "3 months ago, right around the time Patricia started sending letters about the trust fund. I think he was hoping that if he could prevent you from learning about your inheritance, he could somehow avoid his financial obligations to me as well." The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, creating a picture that was even uglier than I'd initially realized. My father hadn't just been hiding my grandfather from me out of stubbornness or spite. He'd been actively stealing from both of us, taking advantage of Walter's generosity while keeping me in the dark about my rightful inheritance. So when Veronica said they needed to kick me out to make room for her business expansion, I said slowly, what they really meant was that they were about to lose the house anyway. "That would be my guess," Walter confirmed. "Though I haven't initiated foreclosure proceedings yet. I was hoping we could resolve this as a family once I was able to connect with you." I set down my soup spoon and looked at my grandfather with new understanding. Even after everything my father had done, Walter was still trying to find a way to keep the family intact. He was still hoping for reconciliation rather than revenge. "What do you want to do about the house?" I asked. "That depends on what you want," he said. "The property legally belongs to me, but I purchased it for your benefit, to ensure that you'd always have a place to call home. If you want to live there, I can evict Marcus and Veronica and transfer ownership to you. If you'd prefer to start fresh somewhere else, I can sell it and add the proceeds to your trust fund." The thought of evicting my father and stepfamily from the house I'd grown up in should have felt satisfying, but instead, it just felt sad. I didn't want to live in a place filled with so many complicated memories, and I didn't want to become the kind of person who used financial leverage to hurt others, even if they'd hurt me first. "I think I'd like to start fresh," I said finally, "somewhere that doesn't have all this history attached to it." Walter smiled, and I could see relief in his expression. "I was hoping you'd say that. I think a clean start would be best for everyone involved." "But what about my dad? If you sell the house, where will they go?" "That will be up to them to figure out. I'm willing to give them reasonable notice to find alternative housing, but I can't continue to support people who have been lying to and stealing from my granddaughter." There was steel in his voice that reminded me that beneath his gentle exterior, Walter Brooks was a man who had built a successful business and accumulated significant wealth through decades of hard work and smart decisions. He wasn't someone who could be easily taken advantage of, which made my father's deception even more foolish. A doctor came in to discharge me, explaining that my body temperature had returned to normal, and there were no signs of frostbite or other complications from the cold exposure. I was free to leave, though he recommended taking it easy for the next few days and staying somewhere warm and comfortable. "You'll come home with me," Walter said as we gathered my belongings, "at least until you decide where you want to settle permanently." Home. The word felt strange and wonderful at the same time. I'd been living in my father's house for months without feeling like I had a real home. Now, this man I just met was offering me exactly that. No strings attached, no conditions or expectations beyond letting him get to know his granddaughter. The drive to Walter's house took us through some of the most beautiful winter scenery I'd ever seen. The snow had stopped falling, and the sun was breaking through the clouds, turning the landscape into something out of a fairy tale. Pine trees heavy with snow lined the winding road, and mountains rose majestically in the distance. Walter's house was a testament to his skills as a contractor. It was a custom log home with soaring ceilings, massive stone fireplaces, and windows that showcased the natural beauty of the surrounding forest. Every detail had been carefully crafted, from the hand-carved banisters to the intricate tile work in the bathrooms. "I built this place about 15 years ago," he said as he gave me a tour. "I was getting tired of working on other people's dream homes and decided to create one for myself." The guest room he showed me was larger than any bedroom I'd ever had, with its own fireplace and a window seat that looked out over a snow-covered meadow. The furniture was clearly handmade, sturdy pieces crafted from what looked like local wood, each item showing the kind of attention to detail that only comes from years of experience and genuine love for the craft. "I made all of this," he said, running his hand along the smooth surface of a dresser. "I kept hoping that someday I'd have family to share it with." That evening, we sat by the living room fireplace, drinking hot chocolate and talking about everything we'd missed in each other's lives. Walter showed me photo albums filled with pictures I'd never seen, including several of me as a small child that my father must have sent during the brief period when they were still in contact. Quote, "You were such a serious little girl," he said, pointing to a photo of me at about age 4, dressed in a tiny business suit for some kind of career day at school. "Even then, you looked like you were planning to take on the world." "I was probably planning to be a teacher," I said, remembering my childhood obsession with playing school and organizing elaborate lessons for my stuffed animals. "Your father mentioned in one of his letters that you'd gotten your education degree. Are you still planning to teach?" I told him about the struggles I'd faced finding a permanent teaching position, and about the online tutoring job that had been my ticket out of my father's house. Walter listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and offering encouragement that felt genuine rather than obligatory. "You know, with the trust fund, you won't need to worry about finding work right away," he said. "You could take your time, maybe even start your own tutoring business or educational consulting firm. You'd have the financial freedom to build something exactly the way you want it." The possibilities were overwhelming. For months, I'd been focused on basic survival, finding any job that would pay enough to cover rent and groceries. Now, suddenly, I had options I'd never imagined. I could travel, continue my education, start a business, buy a house, help other people the way my grandfather had helped me. "I don't know how to thank you," I said as we sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. "You don't need to thank me," Walter replied. "Family takes care of family. That's just how it's supposed to work." But family hadn't taken care of family, had it? My father had chosen financial self-interest over his daughter's well-being. He'd allowed his wife to erase me from their lives, while simultaneously stealing from the grandfather who'd been trying to provide for me. The people who should have protected and supported me had instead betrayed me in the most fundamental ways possible. "Are you angry?" Walter asked, as if he could read my thoughts. I considered the question carefully. "I think I'm more disappointed than angry. I keep waiting to feel furious about what they did, but mostly I just feel sad. Sad that my dad chose Veronica's comfort over our relationship. Sad that I missed out on knowing you for all these years. Sad that it took nearly dying in a car to bring us together." "Anger might come later," Walter said gently. "Or it might not. Everyone processes betrayal differently." He was right, of course. The full emotional impact of what had happened was still settling in. Right now, I was focused on the practical realities of my changed circumstances. But eventually, I'd need to reckon with the emotional damage that had been done. My phone, which I'd plugged in to charge when we arrived at Walter's house, started buzzing with missed call notifications. I looked at the screen and saw dozens of messages from my father, Veronica, and even a few from Chloe and Dylan. "They know I'm gone," I said, showing Walter the notification count. "What do you want to do about that?" I scrolled through the voicemails and text messages, reading increasingly frantic pleas for me to come home and explain where I was. My father's messages started out angry, demanding to know what I thought I was doing by disappearing without warning. But as the hours had passed, his tone had shifted to worried, then desperate. One voicemail from Veronica caught my attention. "Natalie, we know you found the papers in Marcus's office. We can explain everything. Please just come home so we can talk about this like adults." "They know I saw the legal documents," I told Walter. He nodded grimly. "I'm not surprised. They probably checked the filing cabinet after they realized you were gone." The question was whether I owed them any kind of explanation or conversation. Part of me felt like I should at least let them know I was safe, that I hadn't been in an accident or worse. But another part of me felt like they'd forfeited any right to worry about my well-being when they decided to hide my grandfather's existence from me. I think I need some time before I'm ready to talk to them, I said finally. Take all the time you need, Walter assured me. You're safe here, and you're not obligated to make any decisions about your relationship with them until you're ready. That night, as I lay in the comfortable bed in my grandfather's guest room, listening to the wind and the pine trees outside my window, I thought about how dramatically my life had changed in the span of 24 hours. Yesterday morning, I'd been facing homelessness and financial uncertainty. Tonight, I was financially secure and surrounded by the kind of love and support I'd been craving for years. But with that security came questions about what I wanted to do next. The trust fund gave me options, but it also gave me responsibility. How should I use this unexpected windfall? What kind of life did I want to build for myself? And what, if anything, did I owe the father who had betrayed me but was still, despite everything, my father? I fell asleep thinking about new beginnings and second chances, about the grandfather who'd never stopped hoping to find me, and the family I'd never known I had. Tomorrow, I'd start making decisions about my future, but tonight, for the first time in months, I felt genuinely safe and genuinely wanted. The sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand woke me around midnight. I looked at the screen and saw my father's name, along with a text message that made my stomach clench with anxiety. Natalie, please call me. Veronica's in the hospital. There's been an accident. I stared at the text message for a full minute, my heart racing as I tried to process what I was reading. Veronica was in the hospital. There had been an accident. My father, the man who had been lying to me for months, was now asking for my help. Walter appeared in my doorway, having heard my phone buzzing in the quiet house. Everything all right? I showed him the message, and his expression grew concerned. What do you want to do? That was the question, wasn't it? What did I owe the people who had betrayed me? Did Veronica's accident somehow erase the months of deception and manipulation? Did my father's obvious distress override my own need to protect myself from further emotional damage? I don't know, I admitted, sitting up in bed and wrapping the quilt around my shoulders. Part of me thinks I should ignore it. They made it clear I wasn't part of their family anymore. And the other part? The other part thinks that if something terrible has happened, I'll regret not being there, regardless of how angry I am. Walter sat down in the chair beside my bed, the same thoughtful expression on his face that I'd seen when he was discussing the trust fund and the house situation. There's no right answer here, Natalie. Whatever you decide, I'll support you completely. I looked at my phone again, scrolling through the dozen other messages that had come in while I was sleeping. Most were from my father, becoming increasingly desperate as the night wore on. There were also messages from Chloe and Dylan, both asking me to please come home because their mother was hurt and they were scared. Those messages from the kids hit me differently. Whatever issues I had with Veronica, Dylan and Chloe had never done anything to hurt me. They were 16 and 19, still figuring out their place in this complicated family dynamic, and now they were dealing with a medical emergency without any adult guidance, except from my father, who wasn't exactly known for handling crises well. I think I need to go back, I said quietly. Not for them, but for Chloe and Dylan. They shouldn't have to deal with this alone. Walter nodded. Do you want me to drive you? The offer was tempting. Having Walter there would provide emotional support and ensure that I wasn't walking back into the situation completely alone. But it would also escalate tensions at a time when the focus should be on Veronica's health, not on family drama. I think I should go alone, at least initially. If things get too difficult, I'll call you. I'll be ready to come get you at any time, day or night, he assured me. And Natalie, don't let them manipulate you into forgetting what they did. Helping in a crisis doesn't mean you have to forgive or forget. 20 minutes later, I was back on the road to Portland, driving through the early morning darkness on highways that were mostly clear now that the snow had stopped. The 3-hour drive gave me plenty of time to think about what I might be walking into and how I wanted to handle it. I decided to establish some ground rules for myself before I arrived. I would help with whatever crisis was happening, but I wouldn't be moving back into the house. I would be civil to everyone involved, but I wouldn't pretend that everything was fine between us. And I would leave immediately if anyone tried to use Veronica's accident as leverage to make me forget about the lies and deception. The hospital parking lot was nearly empty when I arrived just after 6 in the morning. I found my father in the waiting room of the intensive care unit, looking like he'd aged 10 years since I'd seen him last. His hair was disheveled, his clothes wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept at all. "Natalie," he said, standing up as I approached. For a moment, it looked like he might try to hug me, but something in my expression must have warned him off. "Thank you for coming." "What happened?" I asked, taking a seat across from him rather than beside him. "She was driving to her sister's house around midnight, said she needed to talk to someone about family stuff. The roads were still icy from the storm, and she hit a patch of black ice on the Burnside Bridge. Her car went through the guardrail. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold weather outside. The Burnside Bridge was high above the Willamette River, and cars that went through the guardrail rarely survived the fall." "How is she?" I asked. "Critical but stable," my father replied, his voice hollow. "Multiple broken bones, internal bleeding, head trauma. They're not sure yet if there will be permanent damage." "And Chloe and Dylan?" "They're in the family lounge down the hall. They've been here all night, but I sent them to try to get some sleep a few hours ago." I studied my father's face, looking for signs that this was somehow another manipulation, another attempt to control my emotions and decisions. But the exhaustion and fear in his eyes seemed genuine, and I realized that whatever else might be true about our relationship, he did genuinely care about Veronica. "The doctors said the next 24 hours are critical," he continued. "If she makes it through without complications, her chances improve significantly." We sat in uncomfortable silence for several minutes, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us like a physical presence. Finally, my father spoke again. "I know you found the papers about your grandfather and the trust fund." I didn't respond, just watched his face and waited for whatever justification or excuse he was preparing to offer. "I know you must hate me right now, and I understand why. I handled everything wrong from the beginning." "That's an understatement," I said quietly. He flinched at the coldness in my voice but continued. "When your grandfather first contacted me about setting up the trust fund, I was angry about a lot of things. The divorce, the financial stress, the way he'd criticized some of my choices during the marriage. I told myself that I was protecting you from getting caught in the middle of adult problems. By lying to me about his existence? By trying to shield you from the conflict between us. But as time went on, it became harder to explain why I'd never mentioned him, especially after you started asking questions about your family history for school projects. I remembered those projects, particularly one in high school, where I'd had to create a family tree and had been frustrated by the gaps on my father's side. He'd told me that his parents had died when he was young, and that he didn't have much information about extended family. So you just kept lying. I kept putting off the conversation, thinking I'd find the right time to explain everything. But then I met Veronica, and she was dealing with her own issues related to her ex-husband's family trying to maintain relationships with Dylan and Chloe against her wishes. When I told her about the situation with your grandfather, she encouraged me to maintain the boundaries I'd established. Encouraged you? Or pressured you? My father was quiet for a long moment. I think she was genuinely trying to be supportive at first. But as her business started struggling and money became tighter, the trust fund became more of a sore subject. She couldn't understand why you should have access to that kind of money when her own children were facing college expenses. The pieces were falling into place in an ugly pattern that was somehow even worse than I'd initially thought. Veronica hadn't just been protecting her family unit from outside interference. She'd been jealous of my potential inheritance and had actively worked to keep me from accessing it. And when the lawyer started sending letters, quote, Veronica panicked. She was convinced that if you found out about the money and your grandfather, you'd turn against us completely. She thought that if we could just get you settled in your own place before you learned the truth, we could control how the information was presented. Control how it was presented, I repeated. You mean lie about it some more? We thought we could frame it as a pleasant surprise, something we'd been waiting for the right time to share with you. The audacity of it was breathtaking. They'd planned to kick me out of the house, let me struggle financially, and then present my own inheritance to me as if it were a gift they were generously bestowing. And the house? Were you going to mention that Grandpa Walter owns the house I grew up in? My father's face went pale. How did you know about that? He showed me the foreclosure notice that came to his address yesterday. 3 months of missed payments, Dad. You've been stealing from him while hiding him from me." "I wasn't stealing," he said defensively, though his voice lacked conviction. "I was planning to catch up on the payments as soon as Veronica's business picked up. With what money? You haven't had steady income in over a year." That was true, and we both knew it. My father had been laid off from his engineering job 18 months earlier, and despite multiple interviews and applications, he hadn't found permanent employment. Veronica's interior design business had been struggling too, with fewer clients willing to pay for luxury services in an uncertain economy. "We were planning to ask your grandfather for a loan modification, maybe work out a payment plan that would be more manageable. You were planning to ask the man you've been hiding from your daughter for help with money you owe him for a house you've been living in rent-free?" When I put it like that, the absurdity of their plan was obvious even to my father. He slumped back in his chair and covered his face with his hands. "I know how it sounds, I know how it looks, but I was trying to hold everything together until I could find work again. I thought if I could just get back on my feet financially, I could fix everything else. By lying to everyone involved? By giving myself time to figure out how to make things right." A nurse came down the hallway and approached us with a clipboard. "Are you here for Veronica Brooks?" My father nodded. "The doctor would like to speak with the immediate family about her condition and treatment options." I started to stand up, assuming I'd wait in the lobby while my father spoke with the medical team, but the nurse looked at me expectantly. "You're listed as her stepdaughter on the emergency contact form. The doctors specifically asked to speak with both of you." I was surprised that Veronica had listed me as emergency contact, given how eager she'd been to get me out of the house. But I followed my father down the hallway to a small conference room where a tired-looking doctor was waiting with several folders and what appeared to be X-ray films. "I'm Dr. Martinez," the woman said, shaking hands with both of us. "I've been overseeing Mrs. Brooks' care since she arrived last night." She spent the next 20 minutes explaining Veronica's injuries in detail. Multiple fractures in her legs and pelvis, 3 broken ribs, a collapsed lung that had been reinflated, and a traumatic brain injury that was causing swelling and pressure. The next critical decision point would come in the next few hours, when they determined whether surgery was necessary to relieve the pressure on her brain. "What are her chances?" my father asked. "If we can get the brain swelling under control without surgery, her prognosis is good for a full recovery, though it may take months of rehabilitation. If surgery is required, there are additional risks, but we're cautiously optimistic." "And if the surgery doesn't work?" Dr. Martinez hesitated. "Let's focus on the positive scenarios for now. Mrs. Brooks is young and otherwise healthy. Her body has already shown remarkable resilience." After the doctor left, my father and I sat in the conference room in heavy silence. The medical information had been overwhelming, but what struck me most was how differently I felt about Veronica's condition now that I understood the extent of her injuries. Despite everything she'd done, I didn't want her to die or suffer permanent disability. "I should call Walter," I said. "He needs to know what's happening." My father looked surprised. "You've been in contact with him?" "He's the one who found me yesterday when my car broke down in the blizzard. If he hadn't been driving that highway looking for me, I probably would have died of hypothermia." The color drained from my father's face as the implications of that statement sank in. "You could have died?" "I was stranded for hours in freezing temperatures with no heat and no way to call for help. By the time he found me, I was barely conscious." "Oh God, Natalie. I had no idea." "Of course you didn't. You assumed I'd driven off in a tantrum and would come crawling back when I got hungry or lonely. It never occurred to you that I might be in actual danger." My father started to say something, then stopped himself. What could he say? That he'd been worried about me? He'd spent the entire night calling and texting, but those messages had been focused on getting me to come home and explain myself, not on ensuring my safety. I called Walter from the hospital hallway, updating him on Veronica's condition and letting him know I'd be staying in Portland at least until we knew whether she'd need surgery. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm tired and emotionally drained, but I'm okay." It's strange being back here, pretending like everything is normal when nothing is normal. You don't have to pretend anything. You can help them through this crisis while still maintaining your boundaries about the larger issues. "I know. It's just hard to separate the immediate situation from everything else. Would it help if I drove up there?" I could get a hotel room nearby, just so you'd have somewhere to go if you need a break from the hospital. The offer was tempting, but I was concerned about how my father might react to seeing Walter face to face after all these years of estrangement. Let me see how the next few hours go. If she needs surgery, it's going to be a long day and I might need the support. Just call if you need me, I can be there in 3 hours. Chloe and Dylan were awake when I returned to the family lounge, both looking younger and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen them. Chloe's eyes were red from crying, and Dylan was staring at his phone without really seeing it. "How is she?" Chloe asked immediately. I sat down beside them and explained what the doctor had told us, trying to strike a balance between honesty and reassurance. They deserved to know the truth about their mother's condition, but they didn't need to be overwhelmed with worst-case scenarios. "Is she going to be okay?" Dylan asked. "The doctors are optimistic, but it's going to take time. She has some serious injuries that will require a lot of recovery time, but she's strong and she has good medical care." "Dad said you found out about some family stuff," Chloe said carefully. "Is that why you left?" I looked toward the hallway where my father was talking to another doctor, then back at the 2 teenagers who were looking at me with expressions that were part curiosity, part worry, and part fear that I was about to abandon them during the scariest time of their lives. "It's complicated," I said. "Your parents kept some important information from me about my family, and I needed time to process that. But I'm here now because you guys needed me here." "Are you going to stay?" Dylan asked. "I'm going to stay until we know your mom is out of danger. After that, we'll figure things out as we go." It wasn't a complete answer, but it was honest, and it seemed to provide some comfort to both of them. The next few hours passed slowly, marked by regular updates from the nursing staff and periodic visits from different specialists who were monitoring various aspects of Veronica's condition. My father alternated between pacing the hallways and sitting in stunned silence, while Chloe and Dylan tried to distract themselves with their phones and homework they'd brought from home. Around noon, Dr. Martinez returned with news that the brain swelling had begun to decrease on its own, reducing the likelihood that surgery would be necessary. It was the first genuinely positive development since I'd arrived, and the relief in the room was palpable. "She's still not out of the woods," the doctor cautioned, "but this is definitely movement in the right direction." My father actually cried when he heard the news, tears of relief and exhaustion that he tried unsuccessfully to hide from his stepchildren. It was the most genuine emotion I'd seen from him in years, and it reminded me that underneath all the lies and poor decisions, he was still a person who was capable of love and fear and genuine grief. That afternoon, while Chloe and Dylan were getting lunch in the hospital cafeteria, my father and I had our first real conversation about the future. "I know I can't undo what I've done," he said. "I know I've lost your trust, maybe permanently. But I want you to know that I never intended for any of this to hurt you." "But it did hurt me, Dad. It hurt me a lot." "I know. And I know that saying I'm sorry doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry. I'm sorry for lying to you about your grandfather. I'm sorry for hiding the trust fund. I'm sorry for letting Veronica influence decisions that should have been made based on what was best for you." "What happens now? With the house? With Grandpa Walter? With us?" My father was quiet for a long time before answering. "I think I need to face the consequences of my choices. If Walter wants to foreclose on the house, I can't blame him for that. If you want to have a relationship with him instead of with me, I understand that too." "It doesn't have to be instead of," I said quietly, "but things can't go back to the way they were. Too much has happened. What would you need from me to consider rebuilding our relationship?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on dealing with the immediate crisis that I hadn't really thought about what reconciliation might look like. Complete honesty going forward. No more lies, no more omissions, no more decisions made about my life without my input. I can do that. And you need to make things right with Grandpa Walter. He's been incredibly generous with you, and you've taken advantage of that generosity while keeping him from his granddaughter. My father nodded grimly. "I know. I owe him an apology and a conversation about how to handle the house situation fairly. And you need to understand that my relationship with him isn't conditional on my relationship with you. I'm going to get to know my grandfather regardless of what happens between us." "I understand, and honestly, I think that's probably good for you. He's a decent man, and I let my own pride and stubbornness get in the way of acknowledging that. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start, a foundation for possibly rebuilding something resembling a functional relationship. Whether we could move beyond the damage that had been done remained to be seen, but at least we were talking honestly for the first time in years. That evening, as Veronica's condition continued to stabilize and the immediate crisis began to pass, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called Patricia Henderson, the lawyer who had been working with my grandfather, to establish contact with me. "Ms. Henderson? This is Natalie Brooks. I think it's time we had a conversation about making some things official." Patricia Henderson's office was located in a converted Victorian house on the outskirts of Bend, with a wraparound porch and large windows that overlooked the Cascade Mountains. I'd driven there directly from the hospital after Veronica had been moved out of intensive care and into a regular room, her condition finally stable enough that I felt comfortable leaving Portland for a day. The lawyer herself was a woman in her late 50s with silver hair pulled back in a professional bun and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She welcomed me into her office with a firm handshake and the kind of direct manner that suggested she didn't waste time on small talk. "I've been hoping to meet you for quite some time, Natalie," she said, gesturing for me to take a seat in one of the leather chairs facing her mahogany desk. "Your grandfather has spoken about you constantly since he hired me." "I'm sorry it took a crisis to get here," I replied, settling into the chair and looking around the office. The walls were lined with law books and framed certificates, but there were also personal touches that made the space feel warm rather than intimidating. "Sometimes crises are what it takes to cut through years of dysfunction and get to the truth," Patricia said matter-of-factly. "I've been practicing family law for 25 years, and I've seen situations like yours more often than you might think." She pulled a thick file from her desk drawer and set it in front of me. "This contains everything related to your trust fund, the correspondence with your father, and the legal groundwork we've established for securing your inheritance." I opened the file and found dozens of documents, including copies of letters that had been sent to my father's address over the years, bank statements showing the growth of the trust fund, and legal opinions about grandparent rights in Oregon. The paper trail was extensive and meticulously organized. "Walter told me that my father had been intercepting letters and gifts," I said, looking through some of the returned mail receipts. "That's correct. We have documentation showing that certified letters were delivered to your father's address, but of course we had no way to confirm whether they were actually reaching you until we began investigating more aggressively." Patricia pulled out a timeline she'd created, showing the pattern of attempted contact over the past several years. The frequency had increased significantly in recent months, as Walter became more desperate to establish a relationship with me before I became completely independent and potentially moved away from Oregon. "The trust fund itself is straightforward," she continued, handing me a bank statement that made my eyes widen. "As of this week, the balance is $412,000. The funds have been invested conservatively but consistently, and the growth has exceeded even Walter's optimistic projections." $412,000. Even seeing the number in black and white, it was difficult to comprehend that kind of financial security. I'd been worrying about whether I could afford a security deposit on a studio apartment, and now I was looking at enough money to buy a house outright in most parts of the country. "What are the conditions for accessing the money?" I asked. "There are none, beyond proving your identity and signing the necessary paperwork to transfer the funds to your name. Walter specifically structured the trust to avoid any restrictions or conditions that might allow other family members to interfere with your access to the inheritance." "And the house situation?" Patricia's expression grew more serious as she pulled out another set of documents. "That's more complicated. Walter does own the property where your father and stepfamily are currently living, and they are significantly behind on the agreed-upon payments. Under Oregon law, he has grounds to begin foreclosure proceedings immediately. But he doesn't want to do that. He wants to handle it in whatever way you think is best. If you want him to evict them and transfer ownership to you, he'll do that. If you want him to sell the property and add the proceeds to your trust fund, he'll do that too. And if you want him to work out some kind of payment plan that allows them to remain in the house, he's open to that discussion as well." The weight of that decision felt enormous. I was being asked to essentially determine my father's housing situation, which felt like more power than I wanted over another person's life, even someone who had hurt me. "What would you recommend?" I asked. Patricia leaned back in her chair and studied me for a moment. "Legally, I'd recommend protecting your interests first and foremost. Your father made agreements he couldn't keep, and there should be consequences for that. But from a family dynamics perspective, I think the answer depends on what kind of relationship you want to have with him going forward." I don't know what kind of relationship I want to have with him. A week ago, I thought he was just a man going through financial difficulties who was letting his new wife make decisions he should have been making himself. Now I know he's been actively lying to me for years and stealing from my grandfather. "Those are certainly serious betrayals," Patricia agreed. "But people are complicated, and families are messy. I've seen people reconcile from worse situations, and I've seen people cut ties over much smaller issues. There's no right answer." She pulled out a legal pad and began sketching out different scenarios. "Here are your options as I see them. Option 1, complete separation. Walter forecloses on the house, you take full control of your inheritance, and you build a life that doesn't include your father. Option 2, conditional reconciliation. You establish terms that your father must meet in order to maintain a relationship with you, including making restitution to Walter and committing to complete honesty going forward. Option 3, full forgiveness. You absorb the financial losses, maintain family relationships, and move forward without holding the past against anyone. Which option do you think Walter prefers?" "I think Walter wants whatever will make you happiest in the long run. He's less concerned about the money than he is about ensuring that you have the family support you deserve." I spent the next hour going through financial projections and legal documents, trying to understand all the implications of each possible decision. The numbers were staggering, not just the trust fund balance, but also the equity in the house, the missed payments, and the potential costs of various legal actions. "There's one more thing we need to discuss," Patricia said as we neared the end of our meeting. "Walter has asked me to draft a will that leaves his entire estate to you, his house, his business assets, everything. He wants to ensure that if something happens to him, you'll be completely financially secure. How much are we talking about?" "Conservatively, another $800,000, not including the house your father is living in. Walter has been very successful, and he's lived modestly. He has significant assets that he's accumulated over a lifetime of hard work. The scope of my grandfather's generosity was overwhelming. He'd been setting me up for financial independence that most people could only dream of. And he'd been doing it quietly for years while I had no idea he even existed." "Why is he doing all this for someone he barely knows?" I asked. Patricia smiled. "He doesn't see you as someone he barely knows. He sees you as his granddaughter, his only family, the person he should have been taking care of all along. In his mind, this isn't generosity, it's responsibility." That afternoon, I drove to Walter's house to discuss everything I'd learned from Patricia. I found him in his workshop, a converted barn behind the main house, where he crafted the custom furniture that had become his retirement hobby. The space smelled like wood shavings and linseed oil, and every surface was covered with partially completed projects. "How did the meeting go?" he asked, setting down a hand plane and giving me his full attention. "Overwhelming," I admitted, settling onto a wooden stool beside his workbench. "I knew about the trust fund, but I didn't realize how much money we were talking about, or how much additional planning you've been doing." "I've had a lot of years to think about how to take care of you," Walter said simply, "and I've had the financial resources to make those plans a reality." Patricia showed me 3 different options for handling the situation with my father and the house. "I keep going back and forth about what feels right." Walter nodded thoughtfully. "What does your gut tell you?" "My gut tells me that I don't want to be the kind of person who uses money to hurt people, even people who have hurt me. But I also don't want to enable behavior that could hurt other people in the future." "Those are both wise instincts. I think I want to try the conditional reconciliation approach. Give my father a chance to make things right, but with clear expectations and consequences, if he doesn't follow through." "What would those conditions look like?" I'd been thinking about this during the drive from Patricia's office. Full repayment of the money he owes you, either through a structured payment plan or by selling the house and downsizing to something he can actually afford. Complete honesty going forward, including regular family meetings where we discuss any financial or family issues openly. and some kind of family counseling to help us work through the trust issues and establish better communication patterns. Walter considered this for several minutes, running his hands over a piece of maple he'd been shaping. Those sound like reasonable conditions to me. And if he agrees to them, then I'd be open to rebuilding our relationship gradually. I'm not ready to pretend that everything is fine, but I'm willing to work toward something better if he is. And if he doesn't agree to them, or if he agrees but doesn't follow through, then I think we go with option 1. Complete separation, and he deals with the consequences of his choices on his own. That evening, Walter and I drove back to Portland together so that I could present the conditional reconciliation plan to my father in person. The conversation was too important and too complex for phone calls or text messages. We found my father in Veronica's hospital room, where she was awake but groggy from pain medication. Her face was bruised and swollen, and both legs were elevated in casts, but she was alert enough to follow our conversation. "Dad, I'd like you to meet your father," I said simply. The two men looked at each other for a long moment. 20 years of hurt and pride and stubbornness hanging between them like a visible barrier. Finally, Walter extended his hand. "Hello, Marcus." "Hello, Dad," my father replied, shaking hands with obvious emotion. "I'm sorry about Veronica's accident," Walter said, nodding toward the hospital bed. "I hope her recovery goes smoothly." "Thank you for taking care of Natalie when her car broke down," my father said. "I can't imagine what might have happened if you hadn't found her." The acknowledgement hung in the air for a moment, heavy with implications neither man wanted to voice directly. "We need to talk about how to move forward," I said, pulling up chairs so that we could all sit down. All of us together, with everything out in the open. Over the next hour, I laid out the conditional reconciliation plan that Patricia and I had developed. My father listened without interrupting, his face cycling through expressions of shame, relief, and determination as I explained each requirement. The payment plan for the house would stretch over 5 years. I explained, Walter is willing to reduce the total amount owed to reflect the market value rather than including penalties and interest, but you'd need to make consistent monthly payments and maintain the property properly. "And if we can't afford the payments?" my father asked. "Then you'd need to sell the house and find something within your budget. Walter and I would help with the transition, but we wouldn't continue subsidizing a living situation you can't maintain independently." My father looked at Veronica, who had been listening intently despite her medications. She gave him a slight nod, as much of a gesture as she could manage in her current condition. "What about the family counseling?" he asked. "I've already researched therapists in Portland who specialize in family reconciliation and trust issues. We'd commit to at least 6 months of regular sessions, and everyone would need to participate honestly." "Including Walter?" Walter nodded. "I made mistakes too, Marcus. I let pride get in the way of finding solutions, and I wasn't always respectful of your role as Natalie's father. If we're going to fix this family, we all need to take responsibility for our part in breaking it." The maturity and grace in Walter's statement seemed to deflate some of my father's defensiveness. For the first time since I'd arrived in Portland, he looked less like a man trying to justify his actions, and more like someone genuinely committed to making amends. "I accept your conditions," my father said quietly. "All of them. And I want you to know that I'm grateful for the chance to try to make this right." "This isn't a one-time conversation," I warned. "These are ongoing commitments that will require consistent follow-through. If you agree to this and then slip back into old patterns, there won't be another chance." "I understand. And I want to start by apologizing to both of you, officially and completely. I made selfish decisions that hurt people I love, and I let fear and pride prevent me from correcting those decisions when I should have. I'm sorry, and I'm committed to doing better." It wasn't a Hollywood moment of instant forgiveness and reconciliation. Too much damage had been done for that. But it was a genuine beginning, a foundation for potentially rebuilding something that had been broken for too long. Veronica, who had been quiet through most of the conversation, finally spoke up from her hospital bed. "I owe you an apology too, Natalie. I let my fears about blended families and financial security turn me into someone I didn't want to be. I influenced your father to make decisions that were wrong, and I'm sorry." "Thank you for saying that," I replied. I think we've all learned some hard lessons about the importance of honesty and communication in families. What happens now? Dylan asked. I hadn't noticed that he and Chloe had entered the room during our conversation, but they'd apparently been listening from the doorway. Now we take it one day at a time, I said. We start counseling, your parents start making payments to Grandpa Walter, and we all work on rebuilding trust with each other. Quote, "And you'll stay in Oregon?" Chloe asked hopefully. "I'll stay in Oregon, but I'll be living with Grandpa Walter for a while. I need some time and space to figure out what I want my life to look like, now that I have options I didn't know existed before." The next morning, I drove back to Bend with Walter, feeling like I was carrying less weight than I had in months. The conditional reconciliation plan wasn't a perfect solution, but it felt like a fair balance between protecting myself and giving my family a genuine chance to repair the damage that had been done. Patricia was pleased when we updated her on the agreement, and she immediately began drafting the legal documents that would formalize the payment arrangements and establish clear expectations for all parties involved. "You've handled this situation with remarkable maturity," she told me, as we finished the paperwork. "A lot of people in your position would have chosen either complete revenge or complete forgiveness, both of which can be problematic in the long term. Your approach gives everyone a chance to grow from this experience." That afternoon, I called the online tutoring company that had offered me a job and accepted their position. With my newfound financial security, I didn't need the income, but I wanted the structure and purpose that meaningful work would provide. I also began researching graduate school programs in educational psychology, thinking that I might want to eventually specialize in helping other students navigate difficult family situations. The trust fund transfer was completed within a week, and seeing that balance in my own bank account was surreal. I immediately paid off my student loans, a decision that felt symbolically important as well as financially smart. I also set up automatic transfers to several charities, including organizations that helped young adults aging out of foster care, and programs that provided educational support to students from unstable family backgrounds. My father's first payment to Walter arrived exactly on schedule, accompanied by a handwritten note thanking him for his patience and generosity. It was a small gesture, but it indicated the kind of attention to detail and personal accountability that would be necessary for rebuilding trust. The family counseling sessions began 2 weeks later, and they were as difficult and emotionally draining as I'd expected them to be. But they were also productive, providing a structured environment for addressing years of accumulated hurt and miscommunication. During one particularly intense session, my father broke down completely, while describing the shame he'd felt about his financial struggles, and how that shame had led him to make increasingly desperate and dishonest decisions. "I felt like I was failing everyone," he sobbed. "Failing as a husband, failing as a father, failing as a man." The lies started as a way to buy time to fix things, but they became bigger and more complicated until I didn't know how to get out from under them. "But you weren't failing at everything," I said quietly. "You were failing at honesty and communication. If you'd been truthful about your struggles, people who cared about you could have helped you find solutions that didn't involve lying and stealing. I know that now. But at the time, I was so ashamed and so afraid of disappointing everyone that dishonesty seemed like the better option." It was painful to see my father's vulnerability, but it was also necessary for understanding how our family had gotten to such a broken place. The counseling sessions weren't about excusing anyone's behavior, but about understanding the motivations and fears that had driven people to make destructive choices. 3 months after Veronica's accident, she was released from the hospital and began an intensive physical therapy program that would continue for several more months. The medical bills were substantial, but between insurance and the payment plan Walter had established for the house, my father was able to manage them without going into debt. During one of our weekly family dinners, a tradition we'd established as part of the reconciliation process, Chloe made an observation that stayed with me. "It's weird how much better everyone gets along now that we're all telling the truth about stuff," she said. "Like, the problems didn't go away, but at least we all know what the problems actually are." She was right. The financial stress hadn't disappeared, and the trust issues weren't completely resolved. But there was a sense of relief that came from no longer having to maintain elaborate deceptions or walk on eggshells around sensitive topics. Walter had become a regular part of our family gatherings, and watching him interact with Dylan and Chloe was particularly heartwarming. He'd essentially gained 2 additional grandchildren, and they'd gained a grandfather figure who was genuinely interested in their lives and ambitions. "I never had grandparents growing up," Dylan told me one evening after Walter had helped him with a woodworking project for school. "I didn't realize how much I was missing until now." By spring, the new family dynamic had settled into something that felt sustainable. My father had found steady work with a construction company, and Veronica's design business was slowly recovering as she built her client base back up from her home office. They'd managed to make all their payments to Walter on time, and the financial stress that had contributed to so many bad decisions was gradually diminishing. I was thriving in my online tutoring job and had been accepted into a graduate program at Oregon State University that would allow me to specialize in educational counseling. The combination of meaningful work and continued learning felt like exactly the right path for this phase of my life. Most importantly, I had developed the kind of relationship with Walter that I'd always imagined grandchildren were supposed to have with their grandparents. He was someone I could talk to about anything, someone who offered advice without being controlling, someone who celebrated my successes and supported me through challenges. "You know what I keep thinking about?" I told him one evening as we sat on his porch watching the sunset over the mountains. "What's that?" "If my car hadn't broken down in that blizzard, we might never have found each other. All the legal letters and attempted contact might have eventually worked, but it could have taken months or even years longer." Walter smiled. "I prefer to think of it as the universe finally getting tired of waiting for your father and me to act like adults. Do you think we'll all be okay, in the long run?" "I think we'll be better than okay," he said confidently. "Not perfect, but better. And sometimes better is all you can ask for from a family that's been through as much as ours has." As I sat there, financially secure and surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me, I realized that Walter was right. We'd all learned hard lessons about honesty, communication, and the true meaning of family loyalty. The journey hadn't been easy, but the destination was worth every difficult conversation and painful revelation. The little girl who used to feel invisible in her own family home had finally found her place in the world, and it was better than anything she could have imagined. 2 years later, I was standing in the living room of my own house, a cozy craftsman-style home on 3 acres just outside of Bend, watching Walter teach Dylan how to install crown molding in what would become my home office. The sound of their laughter and the gentle banter between grandfather and step-grandson filled the space with warmth that I'd never imagined possible during those dark days in the hospital waiting room. The house itself was a testament to how dramatically my life had changed. I'd designed it specifically for my needs as both a graduate student and a growing online tutoring business that had evolved into something much larger than I'd originally planned. What had started as one-on-one SAT prep sessions had grown into a comprehensive educational support platform, serving students across the Pacific Northwest, with a particular focus on helping kids from complicated family situations. "Natalie, come look at this joint," Walter called out, pride evident in his voice as he examined Dylan's work. "This young man has real talent for finished carpentry." Dylan beamed under the praise, and I was struck by how different he looked now compared to the scared teenager I'd encountered in that hospital waiting room. He was finishing his sophomore year at Oregon State, majoring in sustainable construction management, and had been working part-time for Walter's former contracting company to gain hands-on experience. "Not bad for someone who used to think a hammer was just for hanging pictures," I teased, earning a playful roll of the eyes from Dylan. "Hey, we all start somewhere," he replied, carefully measuring the next piece of molding. "Besides, Grandpa Walter is a good teacher." Grandpa Walter. The title had evolved naturally over the past 2 years, as Dylan and Chloe had integrated into our expanded family circle. Walter had embraced his role as their honorary grandfather, with the same enthusiasm he'd shown for reconnecting with me, and the relationship had been mutually beneficial for all of them. The afternoon was interrupted by the sound of car doors slamming in my driveway, followed by voices I recognized immediately. Chloe and my father had arrived for our monthly family dinner, a tradition that had become sacred to all of us over the past year. "Something smells amazing in here," Chloe announced as she came through the front door, carrying what appeared to be a homemade dessert. At 18, she'd grown into a confident young woman with plans to study social work at Portland Community College in the fall. "That would be Veronica's famous lasagna," I replied, giving her a hug. She dropped it off this morning before her physical therapy appointment. Veronica's recovery had been slower than anyone had hoped, but she'd made remarkable progress over the past 2 years. She still walked with a slight limp and tired easily, but she'd regained most of her independence and had successfully rebuilt her interior design business with a focus on accessible home modifications for people with disabilities. The experience had given her a new perspective on resilience and adaptation that had improved not just her professional work, but her personal relationships as well. My father looked around the house with obvious pride as he joined us in the living room. "Every time I come here, I'm impressed by what you've built for yourself, Nat." "We built," I corrected. "This place wouldn't exist without everyone's contribution." That was literally true. Walter had supervised the construction and done much of the custom millwork himself. My father had handled the electrical and plumbing work during his weekends off from his job. Veronica had designed the interior layout to maximize both functionality and comfort. Even Dylan and Chloe had contributed labor during their school breaks, painting rooms and helping with landscaping. The house had become more than just my residence. It was a symbol of what our family could accomplish when we worked together honestly and supported each other's goals. "How's the thesis coming along?" my father asked as we gathered around the dining room table for dinner. "I'm defending next month," I said, still hardly believing that milestone was so close. The research on educational interventions for students from high-conflict families turned out even better than I'd hoped. My graduate work had been deeply personal, focusing on developing support systems for students whose academic performance was being affected by family instability. The irony wasn't lost on any of us that my own family crisis had ultimately led to research that might help other young people navigate similar challenges. "And the business side of things?" Walter asked. "We're expanding again. I've hired 2 additional tutors, and we're piloting a program that provides free services to students who can't afford traditional academic support." The tutoring business had grown organically as word spread about my approach to working with students from complicated backgrounds. Parents appreciated that I understood the additional stress their children were carrying, and students seemed to respond well to someone who didn't make assumptions about their home life or family support systems. The free services program was funded entirely through a foundation I'd established using a portion of my trust fund inheritance. It felt important to use Walter's generosity to help other young people who were facing the kind of challenges I'd once struggled with alone. "Tell them about the speaking opportunity," Chloe prompted, grinning at me across the table. "It's not that big a deal," I said, though I couldn't hide my excitement completely. "What speaking opportunity?" my father asked. "The National Association of Family Therapists asked me to present my research at their annual conference in Denver. Apparently, my work on educational outcomes in family reconciliation cases has gotten some attention in professional circles." Walter raised his water glass in a toast. "To my granddaughter who turned a family crisis into a career helping other families heal." "To all of us," I amended, "for figuring out how to be a real family." After dinner, while the others cleaned up the kitchen, I walked out onto my back porch to enjoy the evening air and the view of the Cascade Mountains in the distance. The property had a small pond that reflected the mountains and sky, creating the kind of peaceful scene I dreamed about during those stressful months living in my father's house. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number, and I almost ignored it until I saw the preview text. "Is this Natalie Brooks who wrote the paper on educational resilience?" I opened the message and found a longer text from someone identifying herself as Dr. Sarah Kim from the University of Washington School of Education. She'd read my thesis research and wanted to discuss a potential opportunity for me to continue my work at the doctoral level, while also developing a larger-scale intervention program. The timing was perfect. I'd been wondering what my next step should be after finishing my master's degree, and the idea of expanding my research to help even more students was exactly the kind of challenge I was looking for. I was still reading through the details of Dr. Kim's proposal when Walter joined me on the porch, carrying 2 cups of coffee. You look like someone who just got interesting news, he observed, settling into the chair beside me. I showed him the text message and explained the opportunity Dr. Kim had described. It would mean moving to Seattle for a few years, but the research program she's proposing could help thousands of students instead of just the few dozen I'm working with now. That sounds like an amazing opportunity. What's making you hesitate? I'm not hesitating exactly. I'm just thinking about timing and logistics. The business is doing well here, and I'd hate to disrupt the family dynamic when things are finally stable. Walter smiled. Natalie, you don't owe us your career aspirations. We'll be fine if you decide to pursue this opportunity, and we'll be here to support you regardless of where your work takes you. I know. It's just that I spent so many years feeling like I didn't have a family, and now that I do, it's hard to imagine being geographically separated from everyone. Seattle is 3 hours away, not 3,000 miles. And besides, you'd be doing exactly the kind of work that honors everything we've learned together about the importance of family healing. He was right, of course. The opportunity Dr. Kim was describing aligned perfectly with my professional goals and personal values. More importantly, I now had the kind of family support system that would encourage me to take calculated risks rather than trying to hold me back out of their own insecurities. I think I'm going to call her tomorrow and set up a meeting. I decided. I think that's a wise choice. We sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the sun set behind the mountains and listening to the evening sounds of wildlife around the pond. It was the kind of peaceful moment that I'd learned not to take for granted, given how chaotic my life had been just a few years earlier. Can I ask you something? I said eventually. Of course. Do you ever regret the years we lost? The time when I was growing up and you weren't part of my life. Walter was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer carefully. I regret the circumstances that led to those lost years, but I don't waste energy wishing I could change the past. What matters is what we do with the relationship we have now. Even if my father hadn't made the choices he made, even if you two had maintained a better relationship, do you think we would have been as close as we are now? That's an interesting question. I think adversity has a way of clarifying what's really important in relationships. If we'd had a normal grandfather-granddaughter relationship from the beginning, it might have been more superficial, more taken for granted. So you think the crisis ultimately made us stronger? I think the way we all handled the crisis made us stronger. The crisis itself was just a catalyst for change that was probably necessary. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, I sat at my computer and drafted a detailed response to Dr. Kim's message. I explained my background, my research interests, and my enthusiasm for the program she'd described. I also mentioned that I'd be available for a video call or in-person meeting whenever it was convenient for her. Before sending the message, I walked through my house one more time, taking in the space I'd created for myself with the help of people who genuinely cared about my success and happiness. The house represented security and independence, but it also represented the kind of collaborative effort that had become characteristic of my relationship with my family. If I moved to Seattle for a few years, I'd rent the house to graduate students or young professionals who needed affordable housing in a supportive environment. If I decided to make the move permanent, I'd sell it and use the proceeds to fund more educational programs for students in need. Either way, the house had served its purpose as a symbol of the stability and security I'd built for myself. Now it was time to think about how I could use that stability as a foundation for even bigger goals and broader impact. I sent the email to Dr. Kim and then called Walter to let him know about my decision. "I'm proud of you," he said simply, "not just for the professional opportunities you're pursuing, but for the way you've turned your own difficult experiences into a calling to help other people." "I learned that from you," I replied. "You could have been bitter about the lost years with me, or vindictive toward my father for keeping us apart. Instead, you chose to focus on building something positive for the future. We both made that choice. And now you're making it again, by choosing to expand your work, rather than playing it safe." 3 weeks later, I was sitting in Dr. Kim's office at the University of Washington, discussing the details of a doctoral program that would allow me to continue my research while also developing a comprehensive intervention model for students from high-conflict families. The program would be funded through a combination of university resources and grants, with the eventual goal of creating a replicable model that could be implemented in school districts across the country. Your personal experience with family reconciliation gives you a unique perspective on this issue, Dr. Kim explained. But more importantly, your research methodology is solid, and your early results are impressive. I think you could make a real difference in this field. The conversation lasted for 2 hours, covering everything from research design to funding strategies to long-term career goals. By the end of the meeting, I was convinced that this was exactly the kind of opportunity I'd been hoping for. When would you need an answer? I asked. The formal application deadline isn't until next month, but I'd like to know your intentions soon so I can begin advocating for funding allocation. I'd like to accept, pending discussion with my family about logistics and timing. Dr. Kim smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. I think you'll find that our program provides exactly the kind of support and resources you need to scale up your work significantly. The drive back to Bend gave me plenty of time to think about the changes that accepting this opportunity would bring. Moving to Seattle would mean leaving the daily proximity to Walter and the monthly family dinners and the comfortable routine I'd established. But it would also mean the chance to help hundreds or potentially thousands of students who were struggling with the same kinds of family challenges I'd once faced. That evening, I called a family meeting to discuss the doctoral program opportunity. Everyone gathered in my living room, just as we'd done dozens of times over the past 2 years for important conversations about family decisions. I want everyone's honest opinion about this, I said after explaining the program details. Not what you think I want to hear, but what you actually think about the pros and cons. I think it sounds like an incredible opportunity, Chloe said immediately. And I think you'd regret not taking it. I agree, Dylan added. Besides, 3 hours isn't that far. We could still see you regularly, and you could come back for holidays and important events. My father nodded thoughtfully. The program aligns perfectly with your goals, and the University of Washington has an excellent reputation. I think you should do it. Veronica agrees too, he added. She wanted to be here tonight, but her physical therapy appointment ran late. She said to tell you that she thinks you should pursue every opportunity to expand your impact on other students' lives. Quote, Walter was the last to speak, and everyone turned to look at him expectantly. I think, he said slowly, that this family's greatest strength has always been supporting each other's dreams, even when that support requires sacrifice. You supported us through reconciliation when you could have walked away completely. We should support your career ambitions with the same commitment. So you think I should accept? I think you should accept, and I think you should know that we'll all be here cheering you on every step of the way. The unanimous support was both heartwarming and slightly overwhelming. I'd been prepared for at least some resistance or concerns about the logistics of maintaining family relationships across state lines. Instead, I was getting enthusiastic encouragement to take a risk that could benefit not just my career, but potentially thousands of other students. There's one more thing, I said, pulling out a folder I'd prepared for this conversation. If I do this program, I want to establish a scholarship fund specifically for students from this area who are dealing with family crisis situations. Kids like we all were, in different ways. I handed out the preliminary budget I'd worked up, showing how a portion of my trust fund could be used to provide both financial support and counseling services for local students who were struggling with family instability. The fund would be administered through the high schools in Bend and Portland, with referrals from guidance counselors and family court liaisons. Students would receive not just money for college expenses, but also access to family counseling and educational support services. Walter looked through the budget documents with obvious emotion. You want to create the kind of support system you wished you'd had access to when you were struggling. Exactly. And I want to do it in a way that honors what this family has learned about the importance of honest communication and second chances. How many students could the fund help annually? My father asked. Based on my preliminary research, probably 20 to 25 students per year, with services continuing through their college years as needed. The room was quiet as everyone absorbed the scope of what I was proposing. Finally, Chloe spoke up. So you're not just moving to Seattle to advance your own career. You're doing it so you can help more people, both through your research and through this scholarship program. That's the idea. The doctoral program gives me the credentials and research platform to develop intervention models that can be replicated anywhere. The scholarship fund ensures that students in our own community have access to the kind of support that can make the difference between academic success and dropping out. It's perfect, Dylan said simply. It's exactly what someone with your experience and resources should be doing. 2 months later, I was loading my belongings into a moving truck while Walter, my father, Dylan, and Chloe helped carry boxes and furniture. The house would be rented to a young family who had recently moved to Bend, with Walter serving as the local property manager to ensure everything was well maintained. I'm going to miss this place, I said, taking one last look around the empty living room where we'd shared so many important conversations and family dinners. It'll be here when you're ready to come back, Walter assured me. And if you decide to make Seattle permanent, we'll understand that, too. The important thing is that you're building on everything we've learned together, my father added. You're taking our family's experience with healing and using it to help other families heal, too. The drive to Seattle was bittersweet, leaving behind the mountains and forests that had become home over the past 2 years. But it was also exciting, representing the next chapter in a story that had begun with betrayal and near disaster, but had evolved into something much more hopeful. My first apartment in Seattle was small but comfortable, located near the university campus, with easy access to both research facilities and the community organizations where I'd be conducting fieldwork. The walls were bare, and the furniture minimal, but it felt like a space full of potential rather than a place of exile. On my first day of doctoral classes, I introduced myself to my cohort by sharing a brief version of my family's reconciliation story and explaining how that experience had shaped my research interests. I'm here because I learned firsthand that families can heal from serious betrayals and trust issues, I concluded. But I also learned that healing requires commitment, honesty, and usually professional support. My goal is to help create systems that make that kind of support more accessible to families who need it. After class, several of my fellow students approached me with their own stories of family challenges and academic struggles. It was clear that my research topic resonated with people who had lived through similar experiences, and I realized that my personal background was going to be an asset rather than something I needed to overcome. That evening, I called Walter to update him on my first day. "How does it feel to be a doctoral student?" he asked. "It feels like the right next step," I said. "Challenging but exciting. And I think the personal experience I bring to this work is going to make the research more meaningful. I'm proud of how you've turned something that could have been purely destructive into something constructive and healing." "We all did that," I reminded him. "None of this would have been possible if you hadn't been willing to forgive Dad's mistakes and give our family a second chance. And none of it would have been possible if you hadn't been brave enough to leave that night and seek out the truth about your inheritance. Sometimes the most important changes require someone to take a big risk." 6 months into the doctoral program, I received a phone call that changed everything again. Dr. Kim had been approached by the Department of Education about expanding our research into a nationwide pilot program, with funding that would allow us to test family intervention models in school districts across 10 different states. "It's a 5-year commitment," she explained, "but it could result in policy changes that affect thousands of families annually." "What would my role be?" "You'd be the lead researcher on the family reconciliation component, which means you'd be traveling to different sites, training local counselors and educators, and collecting data on outcomes. It's exactly the kind of real-world application of your research that most doctoral students can only dream about." That night, I called another family meeting, this time conducted via video chat with everyone gathered in my old living room in Bend. "It sounds like an incredible opportunity," Veronica said. She'd been included in our family meetings for the past year, as her recovery had progressed and her relationship with all of us had improved significantly. "But it also sounds like it would mean even more time away from home," Chloe observed. "The travel would be extensive for the first 2 years," I acknowledged. "But after that, most of the work would be data analysis and report writing, which I could do from anywhere." "What does your gut tell you?" Walter asked, using the same question he'd posed when I was trying to decide how to handle my father's betrayal. "My gut tells me that this is why everything happened the way it did." All the pain, all the mistakes, all the difficult conversations we've had as a family led to me being in exactly the right place to do exactly the right kind of work. "Then I think you have your answer," my father said. "We're all behind you," Dylan added. "This family is good at adapting to change when it's for a good cause." As I sit here now, 3 years into that national pilot program, writing the final reports that will influence federal policy on educational support for students from high-conflict families, I'm struck by how impossible it would have been to predict this path during those dark days when I was facing eviction from my father's house. The research has exceeded everyone's expectations. The intervention models we've developed have shown significant positive impacts on both academic outcomes and family stability measures. School districts that have implemented our programs are reporting decreased dropout rates, improved standardized test scores, and fewer referrals to family court services. More importantly, I'm receiving letters and emails from students and families whose lives have been changed by the support services we've helped establish. One message that particularly moved me came from a 17-year-old girl in Phoenix whose parents had been through a bitter divorce that was affecting her ability to focus on schoolwork. "Before I started working with the family counselor your program funded," she wrote, "I thought college was impossible because my parents couldn't agree on anything, including how to support my education. Now I've been accepted to Arizona State with a partial scholarship, and my parents are actually communicating about how to help me succeed. Thank you for creating something that gave my family a second chance." A second chance. That phrase has become central to everything I do professionally, because I understand viscerally how transformative second chances can be when they're supported by honest communication and genuine commitment to change. The scholarship fund I established in Bend has now helped 43 students over the past 3 years, with a 92% college completion rate among recipients. Walter serves on the selection committee, and he tells me that reading the application essays from students describing their family challenges reminds him constantly of why our own reconciliation was so important. My father and Veronica are doing well, having successfully completed their payment obligations to Walter and established a much more stable financial foundation for their life together. Dylan graduated from Oregon State and is now working as a project manager for Walter's former contracting company. Chloe is in her junior year studying social work, with plans to eventually specialize in family crisis intervention. And Walter, now 83, remains the steady center of our family. The person who reminds all of us that love and forgiveness are choices that require daily recommitment, rather than one-time decisions. Next month, I'll be defending my doctoral dissertation, titled Educational Resilience in High-Conflict Families, a Mixed Methods Analysis of Intervention Outcomes. The defense will be held via video conference so that my family can attend virtually, and Walter has already announced his intention to introduce himself to my dissertation committee as the proudest grandfather in Oregon. After graduation, I'll be accepting a position as an assistant professor at Portland State University, where I'll continue my research while also establishing a new graduate program in family educational counseling. Moving back to Oregon feels like coming full circle, returning home with skills and knowledge that can benefit the community that supported my growth. The house in Bend is waiting for me, maintained by Walter, and visited regularly by the family members who helped build it. But I'll also be looking for a larger property where I can establish a residential program for students who need temporary housing while their families work through crisis situations. Sometimes I think about that terrified 22-year-old who left her father's house on Christmas Eve with nothing but a backpack and a car that was destined to break down in a blizzard. She had no idea that the worst night of her life was actually the beginning of the best years of her life. She couldn't have imagined that her family's betrayal would ultimately lead to healing for not just her own family, but potentially thousands of other families struggling with similar challenges. She didn't know that the grandfather she'd never met would become her closest ally and strongest supporter. She couldn't have predicted that the financial insecurity that terrified her would be replaced by resources that would allow her to spend her career helping other people rather than just surviving. Most importantly, she didn't understand that families aren't just the people who hurt you or the people who help you. Families are the people who choose to grow with you, who commit to honest communication even when it's difficult, and who support your dreams even when those dreams require sacrifice from everyone involved. I learned that lesson in the frozen car where my grandfather found me, in the hospital waiting room where we decided to give trust another chance, in the counseling sessions where we practiced telling each other the truth, and in every family dinner since then, where we've continued choosing each other despite our imperfections. Now I get to teach that lesson to other families who are struggling with their own betrayals and disappointments and broken trust. I get to show them that healing is possible, that second chances can work, and that sometimes the most beautiful relationships are the ones that have been rebuilt from the ground up with intention and honesty. The work is challenging and sometimes heartbreaking, but it's also the most meaningful thing I've ever done. Every family that learns to communicate more honestly, every student who discovers that their family situation doesn't have to determine their academic future, every parent who chooses forgiveness over resentment represents a small victory in the larger project of making the world a more forgiving and supportive place. That's the legacy I want to build from the ashes of that Christmas Eve betrayal. A world where families get second chances, where young people have the support they need to succeed regardless of their circumstances, and where the choice to forgive and grow together is always available to people who are willing to do the hard work of rebuilding trust. It's not the life I planned, but it's the life I was meant to live. And I'm grateful every day for the grandfather who refused to give up on finding me, the family who chose healing over holding grudges, and the opportunities I've been given to turn my own painful experience into a source of hope for other people. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.